Well, hello and welcome to obviously another Coffee and Concepts. As always, I'll kind of start with saying a few bits and bobs, and then we'll just open it up for some discussion. You know, one of the reasons why I'm doing this stuff on the four discourses is because, like, I want to try to articulate as well as possible what I think the fundamental difference is between parotheology and confessional theology. And I'm making the claim, and it's an arrogant claim, it's probably a wrong claim, right? Well, one is that there needs to be a reformation. There's always reformations. There are kind of movements. Sorry, I'm just going to change the view here. There are theological movements, and at different times there's qualitative changes, and a reformation kind of has two elements. One of the elements is that it's completely different from what went before. Like, it feels new. All of the ways of understanding basic theological terms seem different, but at the same time it feels like it's in continuity with the past. There is this fundamental break, and yet it feels like it's actually revealed something that was always there in the tradition and in the text, but somehow, even though it was in plain sight, it was kind of hidden in plain sight. So what I'm trying to do is say that it's not necessarily parotheology, but this is part of, I think, what I think is a reformation. So it's not that the church in its confessional form is doing something, is not living up to its ideals. Nobody lives up to their ideals, right? And there's lots of people who critique the church and encourage it to live up to its ideals. But this is saying, no, we're changing the ideals themselves. We're changing but we're looking at a fundamentally different way of thinking about what theology is, what the church is, what the practice and the theory is. So parotheology, right from the beginning, it's always been about that. And I want to use the four discourses because actually, I think that difficult as they are at first, they can help articulate maybe what that fundamental difference is, what that change is. Now, most of you now are able to, will probably be able to respond with, oh, it's, this idea of the divided other, the contradiction, antagonism, asymmetry, all of that kind of stuff, right? So, but I'm trying to kind of like give a very clear understanding of what that means. And probably it'll be done better and differently in the future, but that's what I'm trying to do. So, and that's why we're looking at the four discourses, and we'll be spending still a little bit more time on them. So in this Coffee and Concepts, I want to look at one thing, because in the last talk I gave, I referenced a number of concepts: das Ding, object A. We went through the four discourses, so there was a lot there. What I want to do here is just concentrate on this idea of das Ding, or desire, and the first discourse, the discourse of the master. So if I share screen, I think, yeah, you'll be able to see. I'll just put it up briefly. You should be able to see the master's discourse. Is that correct? Is that on your screen? Which has basically S1 in the top left, S2 in the top right, bottom left, barred S, bottom right, A. So I'm just going to stop sharing that again. So at its most basic level, we can see this as like, this is a diagram that's describing something in a very simple form. And it's describing our entry into language. So as we've talked about before, S1 is the master signifier. God is the ultimate master signifier. Lacan says this is like, the word God is a word that has that generates meaning, right? It generates lots of interpretation, which is S2. S2 is, so the first signifier, if you remember, first signifier doesn't really mean anything, but then other signifiers come in. Language arises when there's at least two words, when there's at least two signifiers. You can't have a language with one word. Language requires at least two words. And the most basic language we have as infants would be presence and absence. Fort Daggy and the kind of the presence and absence of the mother when the child throws food off the table and it gets picked up again, this presence and absence, right? So language requires a chain of signifiers. And the first signifier kind of gets everything kicked off. The uncaused cause, theologically, that's it. Like God is the cause, it doesn't have a cause. The first signifier is a signifier that isn't related to other signifiers. And then it connects with other signifiers and retroactively gains meaning. So now the word God, we say lots of things about this signifier, but also we say that it also signifies something that we cannot grasp. There's always something missing. There's always something that slips out from this signifier God. And, you know, mystical discourse is very good at that, at helping us understand that this is a really interesting signifier that can never fully be signified, can never have full meaning. There's always something slipping out of it, always something missing. Now, for Lacan, that is, although God is kind of the privileged signifier of that, that actually tells us something about language in general. And it tells us something about our entry into language. So if mother is the word of God on every child's lips, you know, then the first words that come to us through our parents, we don't really understand what they are. We don't understand whenever they make demands of us, don't do this, don't do that, or do this or do that. We have to make sense of those. And our birth into language is really where we start to try to make sense of this basic signifier, the basic demands that are made by our parents. Now, here Lacan makes a really interesting distinction between demand and desire. If I'm a parent and I make certain demands of my children, my desire is never at one with my demand. So I might tell my child to, not go out and get drunk. If they're an adult, if they're like a teenager or whatever, don't go out and get drunk. You know, be good. I want you just to go around to your friend's house and kind of, I don't know, just read books and play computer games. I don't want you going out talking to girls and doing all of that. That's the demand. But then, you know, if your parents catch you that you got a bit drunk and were chatting to this girl, you might see, even though they're telling you off, you might get a little glint in their eye that they actually kind of are quite kind of glad that that happened. And vice versa, if you don't get into any trouble and your parents are very proud of you because you've obeyed the demand of your parent, you might feel that, oh, you know what, they probably would have liked me to have been a little bit rebellious. And maybe your parents secretly, although they get annoyed at your sibling who does do bad things, you get a sense that that's actually their favorite sibling, precisely because they're a little bit like they don't do what they're told. Or, you know, think of the prodigal son. It's the son who stays at home. It gets really angry because he picks up something about how the father's desire is precisely really for the one who didn't obey the demand of the father, right? He went out crazy, spent all this money, and yet the child who stayed at home is like, hold on, I get the sense that you've thought more about this kid that went. You kind of like them a little bit more. So Lacan says that whenever a parent makes a demand, you never fully know what they desire. Their desire is a little bit ambiguous. And so a child is always attempting really to understand what that desire is. What is the desire of the other? How do I fit into their desire? What do they want of me? So these kind of questions. And those are questions that we call in psychoanalysis the hysterical question. The hysteric is a person who is a question unto themselves. What do you want of me? Why am I here? What's going on? Right. So there's a certain questioning. So in the master's discourse, in terms of just purely the infant gets the master signifier, which is maybe the demand of the parent. The child is trying to interpret that, understand what it is, what the desire of the parent is. And they never quite get it. They never quite nail what the parent's desire is. The parent's desire is an abyss, an enigma, right? That can never be fully nailed down. And that's what A means, is that the creation of this real curiosity about what does the other desire, what does the other want of me. And the trick is that you can never know, not because the other is an enigma to you, but because they are an enigma to themselves, because your parents don't even know their own desire, right? And that's what barred-esque means, right? The barred-esque means that the other who's making these demands of you doesn't even know themselves. So they might, and their desire is itself constructed from what they thought their parents desired, right? So from a Lacanian perspective, desire is always, our own desire is always connected with what we think the other desires and how we fit into it. And so in a very basic way, when you're an adolescent and you're hanging out with some people, and say just randomly, you're sitting in school beside a few people, and so they become your friends, then you're starting to go, what do they desire? What do they like? And then you're trying to work that out, interpret it, and then you maybe try and act in that way, and you take on their interest. They're into music, so you become interested in music. They're interested in football, so you become interested in football. And so in terms of mimetic desire, you start to learn what you desire through actually interpreting what you think the other desires. But this, there's no end to it. You can never get to the point where you get to someone's actual desire, because their desire is functioning exactly the same way. They're working out what they desire in relation to other people, what they think others desire. Now, if you're listening to this, you'll hear that this is the same as language. This has the same structure as language. Words just refer to other words, and meaning arises out of this slippage. And at no point does a word hit the thing. At no point does a word jump out of the dictionary and just like give you a rock or a book or whatever the word is. The words get their meaning through this constant slippage. In the same way, desire for certain objects arises from this slippage of trying to interpret what the other desires. They're interpreting what the other desires, constructing their desire. And everybody is a split subject. Nobody is sitting around going, I know exactly what I desire. I can have it and be fully satisfied. If you were like that, you'd be an animal, you'd be pre-linguistic. Right? So maybe you can get there with drugs or whatever, but as soon as you re-enter the linguistic world, you're in the world of dissatisfaction, satisfying dissatisfaction, but dissatisfaction. Now, so when you look at this graph, I've said a lot, like that's all a lot of stuff, but that's captured in these four symbols. One was right. I hear the demands of my parents. I try to interpret them. I'm in language. I'm trying to figure out what that desire is. I can't figure out, something's missing, and that generates my desire. And one of the main reason why I can never figure out what their desire is because they're a barred-esque, they're a barred subject. Bam. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, but and then we'll open it up. This. What do I want to say? Oh yeah, when Freud noticed this game and beyond the pleasure principle that his 18-month-old grandson was playing, and he called it the Fort Da game, where the nephew threw a cotton reel away, the parent gave the cotton reel back, the kid threw it away, the parent brought it back, right? And this is basically the most primitive form of game that all kids play, and we all play as adults in some way as well. And he calls it the Fort Da game. In German, Fort means, is it here, and Da means there, or the other way around, whichever it is. Now, that's one notion of presence and absence that the child is playing with very early on. But the second form of presence and absence is more complicated. And that's what I'm talking about here, which is the presence of the other's desire, let's say the mother, the presence of the mother's desire that is simultaneously absent, right? It's not present and then absent. It's a presence that is absent. So now we're getting into dialectics. So this is where you could say dialectics begins. not with presence and absence. That's a non-dialectical way of thinking, where presence and absence are in conflict with each other. Whenever we encounter the desire of our parents, we encounter, as I say, something that we are enveloped by that we also can't name. We're in the realm of ghosts. A ghost is the presence of an absence. So now the child feels the all-encompassing desire of the other, but isn't he really able to define what it is? That's Das Ding. Right? That's Das Ding in a nutshell. Das Ding is the abyss of the other's desire, the abyss of the other's desire that both generates our love and our fear. And by the way, you know, in the Bible, it talks about fearing God and loving God. You're like, how can you fear and love? But our experience of Das Ding is precisely that. There is a love and a fear of the enigmatic desire of the other. It threatens to envelop us. It's terrifying, and yet it's fundamentally desirous. Now, an example that Freud used, and I'm using a book by Richard Boothby. He talks about this, a forthcoming book that will be either called as Nothing Sacred or Embracing the Void or something like that. So he uses a little motif from Freud, where he says that this woman goes into a shop and she's mortified because she thinks that the assistants are laughing at her and they're laughing at her dress. And so she leaves the shop in embarrassment. But she's also kind of aroused by this experience, maybe sexually aroused and very intrigued by it. And then through analysis, Lacan says that one of her earliest memories is the memory of this shopkeeper who groped her through her dress when she was a child, and had a smile on his face. And now at the time, this wasn't a traumatizing event for her. It was maybe a confusing event, right? But later it kind of becomes traumatized and kind of retroactively means something. But the way you can think about it is that initial experience is like an experience of the Das Ding. The other, the shopkeeper, the grin on his face, he is taking some pleasure through his act. Now, she doesn't know what that pleasure is. She's not old enough to understand. She doesn't get it. But she feels that she is encountering the Das Ding, the abyss of the other's desire. And then this later experience, which we can call objet putia, is where that encounter with the abyss of the other's desire is incarnated in a different environment. So same thing, right? Shopkeepers that she thinks are laughing at her, whether they are or not is irrelevant, but she feels that they are, and they're laughing at her dress, the significance of the dress. And they're both getting desire, you know, they're sniggering. And this shopkeeper was like, had a, you know, leering grin on his face. So the Das Ding and the object A, but that precisely comes into being through not knowing what the other wants. However, as I said, the other doesn't know what they want either. And that's the secret of the barred S at the bottom, which, and remember this like little, set of symbols is trying to tell us something that we don't see, that we don't usually see. And everything that's below the bar is kind of like what we're not really aware of. So in terms of your desire, you're obviously really taken by your desire, but you don't really understand it in a normal setting. And you don't really realize that the other doesn't know what they desire. You don't realize the other is divided. And what I'm going to do, and where this is going, of course, is I'm saying that in Christianity, in religion, the self-divided God is hidden. That is repressed. The Master's Discourse is the discourse of confessional theology. The self-divided God is hidden. But I think the next Reformation is where the self-divided God is made manifest, which we see in the Hysterics discourse. And of course, you see this through the Bible, self-divided God. But I would say confessional theology is almost designed to fortify us against an encounter with a God who has an abyss. You know, like I might say, like, maybe I'm not a mystic, but God is, right? So like God, there is an abyss within God. And that's what parotheology is interested in. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Anybody want to jump in? Ask questions of clarification, or go wherever you want. I'll start by asking, and oh, sorry, I saw somebody moving. John, were you going to say something? No. Okay. No. Okay. Is there anybody who wants to ask questions of clarification first? Like, is that anybody who's struggling with these things and want to go like ask any questions of clarification? We'll start there and then we'll move on.
I am in conscience struggling with almost everything at the moment.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I'd have far more questions than really we could get in there. However, are we suggesting that the non-communication of desire is a universal thing? Because I have in mind that the first time I ever noted that the true desire of my father was not what was being told to me was when I was 16. Mm-hmm. And it was a shock to me at the time. So, I mean, if we're talking about it being a universal, surely it should be from a very early age, and one should be able to intuit that, where that is just not my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, no, great. And the truth is you're right, as in if this is right, and let's just, so there's big if, but if this is right, then it is the experience of any creature of language, any Christian of any creature who uses language or signification, which means if there's other animals in our planet, dolphins or whatever we don't quite know of, but any creature of signification, the Lacanian idea is that this mention happens. However, they would say, and I would say that it's unlikely that we kind of remember any of this. Like it's almost the memory of it is in kind of what we see as how we act as adults. But that, like the child, for example, is encountering constantly the desire of their siblings, their parents, like they're constantly in a world of desire, but not necessarily at all like asking the question explicitly, like, what does my mother or father desire? Like, it's not so, but yeah, you are right that this is technically, if this is correct, it is a claim to all of us, no matter whether we are, as I say, neurotic or perverse or psychotic or autistic or any of those structures, whatever, we all have this to some extent. And you don't have to be drawn to it yet. I will try and convince you over time, but hold off,
I think where this discourse interests me is in the slippage and the evolution of language, where we're creating things that are new. That there's like this granularity that happens or a directionality to the abyss. It's true. It may be true that like we don't know what we don't know about ourselves or our desire, but there's a direction to the query into which we're asking and what we're asking of the other in relationship. And when we encounter the strangeness or the queerness of another, like that, I think it evokes something new. Like there's a directionality towards not necessarily connection or oneness, maybe the opposite, maybe a great, like I like the word granularity, where there's more language that's produced because of the abyss than less language. Yes. The lack of knowing or the lack of absolute actually is a productive, creative, the slippage itself is a gift of sorts.
100%. I mean, I would say this, like, the reason this is an answer to the question of why we suddenly kind of like jumped in terms of our in terms of what we could create from, I don't know, whatever our ancestors, let's just say chimpanzees or baboons or whatever, is that as soon as you slip into signification, you slip into an inability to be satisfied, as in a quest always for the unknown. Right. So as soon as you're in signification from this position, you're in the quest of, I can't name, I can't quite articulate, I don't know. As soon as you're in that realm, you cannot have instinct. So instinct is, I'm hungry, oh, I eat and I'm satisfied. I need shelter, I build a shelter, I'm satisfied. As soon as you enter into signification, the idea is that we are now always going to not be able to be quite sated. And so therefore, that's why we can build skyscrapers. That's why we can kind of technology, everything happens because, and it can never be answered. That's the thing. We can never get to the point where we'll be sated. So our development will stop, because we are haunted by the abyss of the other's desire. And that's why at a certain point of evolution, that we suddenly just took off, and didn't really take off too much biologically, but we just took off in terms of, let's call it social evolution.
It's also why skyscrapers themselves won't last very long. The very things that we're building with this fast evolution, like, don't have the grounding of what's considered stable in our instincts, or so.
That's true. So if you're saying this, which absolutely, like, for example, we'll never, like, there'll never be the building that we go, oh, we just nailed it, that's it. So the skyscraper will get bigger, it'll get more thinner, it'll use more materials, or it'll be completely kind of changed, because you never get to the point where, and this is why the big distinction between drive and instinct. We don't have instinct, because instinct does get satisfaction, instinct stops. Drive just never stops, because it's always oriented to the abyss of the other. Yeah.
We've slipped into the theory of Babel, into the myth of Babel here, haven't we?
Oh,
Towers that are going to the sky and being cursed by God because man has defined language. And all of a sudden he's given many languages and an inability to cope and to define anything. The myth is very significant in what we're talking about.
Yes, I love that connection. I haven't thought of that. That's a brilliant connection. Yeah.
Yeah. But we will always face that. And coming back to your point about schism, the schisms in the church or religion generally are always because we think we've got it. Whenever the church grasps hold of it and goes, yeah, let's go with this one, guys. Let's go with this one. This is what we've got. That's when it always fails. If you look at church history, as soon as it thinks it's grabbed hold of a truth, a definition, a play, a plan, and that's when it starts to fail. That's when schism occurs. That's when new ideas come about and the church splits.
Yes.
It seems to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like in Northern Ireland, I can't remember the number. It might be more than this. There's at least 27 Presbyterian denominations. And with the Presbyterianism within Northern Ireland does very much like to kind of nail things down. And so it's fascinating that so many Presbyterian denominations, because that split precisely what you're saying. It's not the naming, but it can never work. Which is what John was saying, is like, because it never works, because you can never get it, then you're just setting up for another schism. Yeah.
And I think there's something to embracing schism rather than the orthodox view of like being frightened by it. Like, if we can start to say, no, actually the weird, unique view that you have, not only maybe I absolutely don't believe it, or I come with so many more questions because of who you are and what you're thinking, but there's something profound in a relationship that provides that kind of dialogue, that it provokes dialectic, like to be afraid of the new. This is I feel like that. It's a tyrannical like movement towards homogeneity, like that we want everything to be the same. We want not just to participate, we want things to be the same. We want people to think absolutely alike, and that's like in that's kind of like, I feel like the opposite of the discourses of love and kindness and kind of the profound basis of like, radical theology in general, but like Christianity as well, at least in its supposition.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're articulating what one of the ways in which you can understand what this Reformation might look like, because you're talking about not a difference in the what, but the how. So you're saying like, yeah, we have all these different groups, and you can have those different groups and they'll propagate and change. But what is it possible for us to hold the what of our belief in a different way? The funny thing is, I think that's such a significant change that I think when you go to that change, you're talking about like that's the kind of Reformation, that's a different modality. And Soren Kierkegaard talked about that. He said, it's not the what, but the how. There's something about, not finding the right like denomination or parotheology is the right what, but rather, and I think it connects with Hegel's absolute knowledge. It's more, when you realize that it's actually this encounter with the abyss of the other's desire that can never be satisfied, it generates the schisms. And if I can make my peace with that, then that's fine. So the weird thing is then you'll stay within your schism, but you'll have such a different relationship to it. Nothing changes, but everything changes. Yeah.
The very definition of death is immobility.
Very definition of death is
immobility. You talk about churches dying or people or death within ideas and things like that. The definition is immobility, the inability to not embrace dynamism, to not embrace the new, to not understand. You can die before you die by just simply not moving.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's why the term death drive is so interesting, because it has the word death, which is like immobility and stopping, and then it has the word drive, which is ongoing. So you suddenly have this weird term that's saying there's a negativity that generates. So there's death, the way you're talking about it, and then there's death drive. And death drive is almost this kind of constant, yes, things die and things are reborn, and where that keeps us moving, but it's not death, and it's kind of like the stoppage.
I think the thing I'm kind of struggling with is the whole temptation to define things linguistically, to define things from a intellectual perspective. Because as soon as we do that, we are holding a dead object. We've almost killed the idea by defining it. So I'm just wondering what the benefit of language and intellect is in the pursuit that we are embarking in, whatever that is.
Yes.
What is the benefit?
You can't learn to juggle without throwing up some balls.
That is a really good way of putting it. Yes. Yeah, indeed. You can't. That's really good point. There has to be mobility to get somewhere, and even if that is a complex mobility, involving incomprehensible amounts of dynamic action. In the study of fluid dynamics, it's all guesswork. You put a propeller into a pool, and you've got billions of atoms all interacting with one another, and you can never precisely tell what the result of any particular one action is. Forgive me if this is a bit of a hyperbolic example here, but that is the case, isn't it? You are dealing with a dynamic fluid situation beyond actual definition, and you can only set a certain amount of quotients, a certain amount of rules, and go, well, this generally is what happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about this theory, but I don't think it answers your question exactly. I think there's another dimension to what you're saying. But one of the interesting things about this, Lacanian kind of understanding of language, is it's a way of saying, because if you take it, everything we've said here if you take this, then it basically says there is a dimension that can never be articulated by language. So weirdly, it is a theory that says not only is there something that can't be defined at the moment, but like as in principle, we could know something, but we currently don't. Like I don't know what's outside the door, but I could open the door and find it. Or a scientist might not know the results of a certain experiment until they do the experiment. So there's a type of things that we don't know because we lack knowledge. This system goes a step further and says there's things that we cannot know because unknowing the abyss of the other can never be grasped. So it is a linguistic theory that interestingly says that there's something that can never be named by linguistics. Never, not even in theory. Like there's something necessarily that cannot be named. And the name for this for Lacan is the real, the capital R real. The real is the name for what cannot ever be reduced to a linguistic system. So that's one way of answering. Is it is a kind of theory of mysticism in one way, because it's a very, very kind of rigorous linguistic theory to show that there's always something that resists linguistic theory that we're caught up in. However, you might still go, yeah, but that's a really strong linguistic theory, so that's where I'm thinking you might be saying a little bit more, but then you might not be fully satisfied with my answer.
I'm not sure I need to be why do I need to be as happy with your answer?
Yeah.
Because actually, yeah, it's lovely to have these conversations and to try and, define and have a conversation and to bring language to what we are trying to express. It's lovely.
Yes.
But if something is universally true, it's comprehensible by rocks. It's indescribable anyway. The worship is there regardless of whether we have a definition of it.
Yeah.
And so therefore I can just say, yeah, it's lovely to define it, but I don't have to. I don't have to understand computers. I don't have to understand, how water flows down a river. I can just let it be as well. So this drive to define, this drive to understand is good, and we've got brains for a reason. But on the other hand, it doesn't matter.
Well, here, I'll give you this because this is very good. This is good, right? I'll give you three. I go like, I think in terms of this idea of the real and God, I'm going like, I think by definition, we all have to take one of these three stances, right? One of these. So I'm going to, and there's maybe even a fourth, which I'll mention. But so one is we go that, well, we don't know, but God knows, right? So there's a kind of, we go like, listen, we don't know, but there is, God knows. The real is knowable, if only by God, not by us, but by God. Secondly, there's something unknowable because even the absolute is unknowable to itself. So there's an unknowing in reality. Or three, I don't know. We don't know. Like it could be either of those, but there's something about orienting ourselves to the real or to the unknown, which is that it comes to the heart of faith. Now, I say there's a fourth because you could split that last one into two. You could say, well, I don't know, but somebody might know, or you can say, well, nobody could know, right? Nobody could ever answer that question. So it's a weak form of agnosticism where you go like, well, I don't know, but somebody else might have worked it out. And the strong agnosticism is, I don't think we can make a decision between those two. So in a way, it might just be good to kind of have those three in front of us and to go, right, okay, so either the standard, I'm not saying all mystics are like this, but the standard mystical approach is there is something about God and that signifier God that we can never fully name, but God is a whole that we cannot wholly grasp. The second is that God is a whole not with a W, with an H, that cannot grasp God's self. And then three, hey, that really is not something that we can know. But religion is a form of orienting ourselves to the transcend, to the unknown. And I'm happy to kind of like to not know. And actually, icon originally was that third position. Icon was kind of like, so Yeah, and it sounds like you're more the third, which I think is a very reasonable position. Although I don't want to push you into a position at all. I really don't. Maybe you're going, I like all three, but it sounds like you're maybe saying the third one, which is, I love the conversation. I love this. I love our orientation to the mystery. But I'm concerned about too much trying to nail down how we articulate what that mystery is.
Yeah. That's sorry, I don't want to dominate. I find it fascinating that we have been given a brain, given linguistic capability to try and describe these things that can never be frustratingly described. It's almost a curse.
Yes, yes.
It is almost a curse. And,
yeah.
and you know, one could perhaps argue the symbolism of the tree of knowledge and good evil is that curse.
Yeah.
A desire to define what is truth, to define what it is, instead of just garden.
which by the way is a good defense of my position here, which is like by definition, because we're so drawn to the abyss of the unknown desire that we can never be satisfied, so we will always be pushing for answers,
always toiling.
Now I'll say one other thing about the first two, is that the first one looks more like traditional physics. So traditional physics was, the world is in principle knowable, but we don't know it because obviously, there's so much more to discover. So in physics, the idea you see it a lot with some of the traditional physicists, is that if we knew everything about the position and the location of every particle in the universe, we could literally know everything. We could, because the universe is kind of like a whole, and we could go back or forth. So there's kind of thing is, of course, we could never do it, but God could do it, right? So there's that. And then when you get to modern physics, quantum mechanics, you get to this type of unknown that isn't connected to what we don't know, but an unknown that is woven into the physical reality itself. Now, but I will say that, that's not a done deal in quantum mechanics. That's the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics that says, that wave particle duality tells us something ontological about reality. And, the more you know about the position of a subatomic particle, the less you know its velocity, that kind of fuzziness. But if you go with the Copenhagen interpretation, you have in classical physics, the unknown is what we don't know, but we could in principle know. And in the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, there is a type of fuzziness or superpositioning within reality itself. And then, of course, there are, and this brings me back to you, William, there are also a lot of physicists who go, we don't want to make a decision on the interpretation, right? So go like, we're enjoying doing all these experimentations and knowing, but aren't prepared to, nail their colors to either, Einstein's mast or Niels Bohr's mast. So I accept all of that.
Yeah. I love it.
Anybody else want to jump in? I didn't realize we had a few more people since when we started, there was only 4 of us or so, but anybody else who hasn't said anything want to jump in?
I was going to say something to something William said at one point about the void being the creative force. Like, I think if we're creative beings, and maybe as an expression of God, like, because I don't know. It seems like this view has like God being up here, and we're like, I don't know what it is. Who knows? But if we are the expression of God, we also have a creative, like that void of creative force in us.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me. What was the artist? Is it Picasso who drew like 30 or 40 of the same?
Get to the,
what was that?
A direction. Oh, sorry. Did I cut out?
Oh, you cut out. Sorry.
Yeah.
Say it again.
If we have a void in our nature for creative purposes.
Oh yes, I heard that. Sorry, I didn't hear John. I think John jumped in very quickly. Oh no, he didn't. Oh, sorry. No, I was thinking of, I think it was Picasso, but correct me if I'm wrong, any artist, but who drew the same picture of lilies, water lilies or whatever.
Monet.
Thank you. Look at that. It's embarrassing. But it kind of almost is like, because he could never nail it, because there was this void of this creative kind of like, you can never nail it, never quite nail it, that created this. And not even just lots of paintings about different things, like the painting of the same thing. I think that's the kind of creativity you're hitting on.
The fun is in the discussion. The fun is in the, so like if we're always like, I think we have to have the idea that we're all heading somewhere so that we keep doing it, but that we never get there is probably also the point. Like we probably have that contradiction in us. Like that.
Yeah.
I think there's something about the hyper general, like when we're trying to talk about these big conceptual things, that's always going to breach into some kind of talk of the mystics or the mystery, or the diving of the abyss. But I think the power of language that's used in the now is for the specific. It's always within parameters. It's not the thing that's trying to break parameters, though it's inviting poetry, which is the semantics, the play of language, that's relational and that allows for some new construct or meaning to arrive. So like there's a dance there, and I love that Chris was joking about like we should try intuitive dance, like poking fun at this. But like I also know that this when we bring in the arts, Monet in particular, like his obsession was with color, and the fact that like to look at the same thing, it wasn't just simply composed of color. It wasn't that simple. It in fact like reflected a much more complex reality. And as he looked day after day, season after season, the kind of light, the kind of context that the very same subject produced was diverse, expressive, and profound. It was an ongoing gift. It wasn't a one and done, I've figured out what Lily is. There was never an arrival point, in other words. And as I was going to make the joke earlier, but when the question is like, when do you name a painting finished? Like it can be, it falls into the same thing. Well, like I did, so it's the real. I'm still in process, so it's unknowable. And then when like I've given up, well, or maybe I haven't, I fall into the unsure state. This the same kind of positioning we have with the general, I think we can apply to the specific as well.
Yeah. Yes, and I want to stick now with this Monet water lilies. This is great because a thing that you'll see with Zizek one time, like because Zizek uses the same jokes and the same kind of like examples, right? And you'll see this time again. And I heard him once say why, and I thought it was brilliant, right? Now he's very prolific. Obviously, he's got like 100 books, but he goes back to the same things. And his response was, and he kind of defined two different approaches. But one is, right, you're always moving to the new, right? You do something, you complete something, you move on to the next thing, which he would call maybe a capitalist logic. You've got something, you're a bit dissatisfied with it, you move on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But he said that a kind of materialist perspective of, don't turn off the phone. His position, a Lacanian position, is that you actually can never fully exhaustively use up an example. And so his whole thing is, I use the same examples, but he says, you'll notice that I'll bring a different point out. I'll tell the same joke and then I'll get something else out of it. And this is like parables. The reason why like we don't constantly recreate parables is very weird how little we do. I've tried to make new parables, but it's because in a sense, you go back to the same parable and you realize it's never exhausted. Just like Monet with the water lilies, he's going back to the same thing because it's never exhausted. And that is very similar to this Lacanian notion that it's not just the real is what we don't know. So we actualize something, we understand it, then we move to what we don't know, and we're moving forward. The idea is that the actual has potential within it. The actual is never fully actualized. The actual always has an abyss within it. And I think that is a very important a comment. And by the way, there's a political dimension to that, because if you have things, and so it's right, you've got two options at the moment within our general system. Is you either don't have something, you're not happy, you get it, and then it doesn't really satisfy you, so you have to get the next car, the next iPhone. There's a certain kind of movement. You get the thing, you exhaust it, you move forward. Is it possible to have something like a car that you like, and you also know that it's incomplete? And so you kind of start to enjoy the fact that it's got a few dents here and there, and that you have to turn the key in a really bizarre way to get it to start. And you have to use a certain technique to open the car. I have a mate, by the way, he's got a car just like that. No one could steal it because there's so many things he has to do to get the damn thing to run. Like, it's just so old and crappy. And it's a wonderful car for that reason. But so there is not only something interesting philosophically in this, or theologically in this, even politically. It's like, and this is what love is, by the way. Love is where the other is still an abyss that you do not know. They are present, but they're never exhausted. So if you keep moving from one person to another, you're not really in love, because you're not connecting with the abyssal dimension of the other that can never be used up and exhausted. So yeah, anyway, I think that's very, very important in this conversation.
Peter, that just made sense to me. Your description of love as the what's incomplete yet. I've always understood love. I've gotten to where I redefine love as curiosity, and it's they share a similar root word, curiosity and love, and this idea of taking care of or taking interest in, and the idea of sharing in that abyss of the other. So there is some aspect then in which we can participate in it sounds like, in creating some of that abyss, and in sort of nurturing that abyss, so that we are sort of always in a place of something new to know that we don't know yet. I'm thinking of Rene Magritte when you were talking about Monet and how many different ways he tried to paint lilies. I mean, Magritte sort of was a trickster of a painter at times. He has that famous painting, "This is not a pipe," and it's yes. Painting of a pipe, right? I mean, he's intentionally saying, try to see something different.
Yes,
which
that's
sort
a great painting.
Almost inviting you to see something of an abyss there.
100%. Yeah, I'm glad we hit on love then, because actually love, I think, is as you say, it's a great way to kind of enter into this conversation. And here's the thing about Richard Boothby's book, Is Nothing Sacred, which, by the way, I'm talking about him because he's coming to my Wake Festival, and so I read his book. But his main argument in the book is fascinating, because it's very different from the approach that I've taken. People like me and some of the people I like, they talk about Christ, the idea of Christ and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and concentrate on the meaning of that. Richard Boothby concentrates on the sayings of Jesus, particularly love your neighbor and love your enemy, right? He does. And what Boothby argues very, very persuasively is that we start, like, religion is in a sense a way of orienting ourselves to the curiosity mentioned, to this otherness that both frightens us and also draws us. And he talks about how, in Greek mythology, this is way up in the sky, and he talks about how this changes. But he says in Christianity, in the sayings of Jesus, particularly the sayings of love, when he says love your neighbor, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, and you can sum up the whole of the law, like love God and love your neighbor as yourself. What is being said, Boothby says, is it's a revolutionary idea that religion orients itself to this abyss that we can never grasp. And Christianity says that you find that abyss in the other, and that when you love your neighbor, what that really means is that you're open to and curious about and reaching out to what makes them strange and weird and what you cannot quite grasp. And that Christianity is really innovative in this, particularly in its love of enemy, which is quite a unique thing to love this dimension of the other. So yes, love is very, very, very key to this. Anyway, so thank you for bringing that up. And I definitely recommend both, because we'll definitely be doing a book study when it comes out on that book. We're coming up to, we've hit the hour mark. So just any final comment or thought from anybody? Would people be happy with me sharing this? I think this is a really good conversation. I do share some of our conversations and some of our seminars. I just thought this was a very, I really enjoyed this. So I see noddings. So I'm going to go with that. Yeah, unless you've got, email me if you don't want me to, but great. Okay, listen, thanks very much for this. I find this really, for me personally, a really enjoyable and enlightening conversation. I will see you all maybe next week. I'll maybe pop into coffee and conversations, but there's plenty of stuff coming up. I don't know if any of you, I know Chris is going to be coming to Wake. I may see a couple of others of you there. Also, it looks like we're going to do Spark. I had Spark off the list, and then a friend of mine, Erin, who's been before, she was like, listen, because I wasn't getting anywhere with the hotel. She said, I'll take over. So she took over, started conversations with the hotel. So it looks like it might be happening. So in October, that'll be a really nice retreat. So anyway, thanks so much for taking part. Take care. Bye-bye.